Gaelic Jew, Gaelic J as Gaelic Nerach.
Sé Claare na Gael with Scholar Scalia Machnish as Babaliam Shuish Altaga. My name is Robert Cutting Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Did the ever hear tell of old Bobby Bob?
And in this bilingual programme, Claare na Gael, I'll be giving part of it in the English language as Nim Perteliagi Sakilg, and I'll be giving another part of it in the Manx Gaelic, Chinyanamera, the mother tongue of Ellen Vanning, the Isle of Man. As Banach and Juris now published in 1794, a review of the Manks History has brought us to the intervention of Illiam Dawn to save bloodshed and to safeguard the island and its rights and privileges with the parliamentarians. On the restoration of the monarchy, although Charles II treated the Stanleys poorly, despite their loyalty to the Royalist cause, they did actually return as Lords of Man, which of course was what did for poor Illiam Dawn in the end. To Jonathan Harker chit the Lord Dr John Seward, on St Chamber studereseg, as te greu de vel Aegean, vain Enish, de vel a surransach sa tai benritege, Renfield, cowrach amach, trwy na rag en rachta legge, de vel Count Dracula sa Nurchen. Te yindeseg John Seward na rennis munien a sen roshnish. A Pencarrow house is near Bodmin in Cornwall, and a song about the Pencarrow hunt actually shares a tune known in Wales as Dyfyrwch Gwir Dyfi, the delight of the men of Dyfi. Now Sue White and Gareth Hedges sing the song, they call it just Pencarrow. Tashu geestiach rish radio vanning, stashu na nashun, vis scholar scalia mach, why doolish Ellen Vanning.
He winded his horn, he
Sung by Sue White and Gareth Hedges, that's a song which they call Pencarrow, often called the Pencarrow Hunt, and in the north of Cornwall it's also known as Lord Arscott of Tetcott, with words possibly based on local legend, but probably written by the Reverend Robert Stephen Harker, who also wrote the words for Trelawney. Of course, he passed those off as traditional for about 30 years before it was rumbled. To Robertson then. Notwithstanding the late struggles of the Manx for civil liberty, and this would probably include the revolt by Edward Christian, but also particularly, of course, 1651, the later action of William Christian, Illiam Dawn. The tenures of many of their lands, says Robertson, were so intricate and precarious as to injure the people, without increasing the revenue of the lord. Accordingly, James, in 1703, by an Act of Tynwald, commonly styled the Act of Settlement, ascertained and confirmed these possessions. Now, the Act of Settlement is sometimes referred to as the Manx Magna Carta. It was an Act of Tynwald agreed to by James Stanley, the 10th Earl of Derby, then the 13th Stanley in all, to hold the kingship or lordship of man. And this had been a bone of contention with the Manx farmers that in Stanlach Moor made them feudal tenants, and the handing down of property through Manx families had been restricted. By the Act of Settlement they gained the right to possess and alienate, a technical term meaning to sell, give or will their land. Wel, ta sy'n clas yn Gilen yn early Seward. Ta Harker yng Ngolbac, as te coron so dreil as a stwega. Te greil yor is tre generach, de beabledoch seilgech amach sledden kunta corritrachelia. Lesh edder yn dech red de lisin Corsilia Renfield, a fair chouds nish, te an sus source de chaure, je chit as gull a chount. Sgôn tam I fag yn sio ffos, ach trenium gedden gus na daten, tam I shielden de ginnum. Crane rid mai ve, der en benasje Harker, kop jenach killender en ons klauskriwen. A bear care a ve ein riw, fedden maak na daten acht elia. Hoor me Renfield, as een na hai de kuns jameregge, lesh na raiach en egge fillich, as munga de meig. Eg tre shen ve jean gesunt as pecher bier en mi fagen de riw. Hai mi schies as lormirish immedi cushion. As sulju je henke ons ach toegezag. Esch, je agne heen, lore mechion golde valia. Kush genelle riw jit gauws de visem, se tre te gauw en shaw. Now, in 1968, Irish group SWEENEY'S Men recorded an album on which they sang their version of Dominic Behan's song about Dicey Riley.
Poor old Dicey Riley hath taken to the sup, and poor old Dicey Riley will never give it up. It's off each morning to the pub, and then she's in for another little drop, and the heart of the roll is a Dicey Riley. She walks along Fitzgibbon Street with an independent air, and then it's down by Summerhill, and at the people stare. And now it's nearly 1:30. I'll just drop in for another little one, and the heart of the roll is a Dicey Riley. Oh, poor old Dicey Riley has taken to the sup, and poor old Dicey Riley will never give it up. It's off each morning to the pub, and then she's in for another little drop, and the heart of the roll is Dicey Riley.
Johnny Moynihan led the vocals there with harmonies by Andy Irvine and Terry Woods. Terry Woods had just replaced Joe Dolan in Sweeney's Men at the time they recorded that album, early 68, simply called Sweeney's Men, and from which we heard Dominic Behan's song Dicey Riley. The Jaru, Lore, la Shigaris, the Lure, Machan Gedden Kid, the Gael, Chilirach. Tammy Krell, be der aber Kawa, Gerwe Emrich Harker, as der Rami Eliane Skriunen, as date and the rag and rachtel egge, Weiden leden erlu the screw me hen the merahan, look tre geer the oil back, Jay. Sonacht morte, ta aures gierem. Wa oljen a rag and rachtel shen, kochonald ons acht, rish chit fair account. Kridesh vispun the kleden eigen in boeiach show. Vodde wij de wel een geel ruggesag egge, gin boeiach, me gaan barriach toe doorvallen se verjere hol. Verjood, dashen heen zo vegach, as se van ledes kajegge, tjau moei je doros kabal de tai follum, lore de kinjach je, meinstjer. Sjaag ol je jeen de wij vierige en ein. Ach, lurt hamelt, henk me bij. Tamachar ach beggen ro sunte getreit on de jino sautje de Jonas Jach raw down less fashion. And one of the people involved in the act of settlement was Bishop Thomas Wilson, and subsequent Lords of Man resented the bishop for his part in, as they saw it, removing their royal rights and privileges in a way that they considered impoverished them. Let's return to Robertson's text, though, and he's referring here to James Stanley, who'd agreed to the act of settlement. And by this policy, or generosity, he says, considerably promoted the peace and prosperity of his subjects. He died in 1735 without issue, and this ample inheritance of the Isle of Man devolved on James, the second Duke of Atholl, who was descended from Lady Amelia Sophia, the younger daughter of the 7th Earl of Derby. And a footnote tells us that this lady, Lady Amelia Sophia, married John, Marquis of Atholl, grandfather of James. And returning again to the text, Robertson observes that during his possession of the island, its real interests were either mistaken or neglected. And that's the Welsh band Cromlech in a tune called Cerrig yr Afon, the Stones of the River.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Siod yw stasiwn na nasiwn o Radio Fanning, as yn siod as yw geisiach, rys Claire na Gael, mish Robert Gytyn Carswell, Robert y Carslach.
Heard tell of old Bobby Bob.
As we Claire na Gael reclash and the shacht and looked at gull or scale mach a cheer show, Master Claire and Radio Fanning Elia, through den chramen agert in the nega Radio Fanning. As the Claire na Gael master na chieden door and the podcasten vis redden nasty in the nega Radio Fanning, na trud reich erder and podcast Elia, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Audible, Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, na Alexa. And Robertson goes on to explain here why, under James Murray, the second Duke of Atholl, the island's real interests were either mistaken or neglected. Agricultural industry yielded, he says, to a spirit of illicit enterprise, which, though it enriched a few individuals, impoverished the community. Now, whatever David Robertson's views on the rule of monarchs might be, he was in the island as a revenue man, a customs official of the crown. This commerce, he says, was in open violation of the laws of the island. I'm not sure that's actually true. The whole point was that luxury goods were coming into the island and paying the full Manx dues to the Lord of Man, but those dues were much lower than what was payable on importing those same goods to Britain and Ireland. And the fact that people were running those goods from the island then into Britain and Ireland was in violation of the laws of Britain and Ireland, but it wouldn't necessarily be an offence against Manx laws per se. And that's something to discuss. Fyddi the jinnach gol tair smunnion, as esh. Maso henk me by. Ta mi awrasach mechaun na temen cuna sio ega. Maso ta mi a chor fawd an tenjelach, de rail ar a gyr as de ina werlw peri chanli al de bech fame Lior le Jonathan Harker, a naio le sfyd mein fawr, sy train gus lunning. Treu hŵr mi tiachterach cwrt oil manche Billington, de jinnach cor daw fis by vege, smunny mi de bech na share de gol schieskus Whitby as de chulina sin in het heen brailtes en Jane Lids van mi giri. Ve form nish, de lorge lucht daglach shen account gus in het eg ons lunning. Na san mi, fyddi de vod much corishe. Ren Billington sa, tan a wunye eg mai, chit mchwail eg a stasjoen. As renny corlesh mi gus tai an ege. Bol ren a drege de rawe orum cewan ni. Tad feel, lesh fieltus firniach sheer York. Cor de chulje rid de goldachas, for Gael sere de yinno morsailish. Now, will you go away with me, my young girl? That's the question posed by Scottish Gaelic singer Archie MacLean.
Nach feint u keilen of hier, at jage selvaanam, kasje vel schalle kwan hier, nur de wiese lien traatje, am fallauwe in jok, nam steetje lau marsale, kom feint u au, nam nie, got de bian sanjan, hier jak mi. Sviara, quando ages watran, shelan roagle vilse gar explora terca quawan, am favolau marivignoc, non gejo lau marsala, gon fecto am capni, got viene sonjane, here jacmi. Hima grut a curin schies, man gira rein mi akel, shan geran wanje scherle hin, chach piste jere Gael, am falavo lau marigno, non jejo lau marsala, come feito aun gagni, god vian, senjan jere Gael.
A song written by Andrew Sinclair of Tiree in the late 19th century and Follow Huliam Ribignog, and sung there by Archie MacLean. Fy fysach uliw der am I tarwch as den ei gier van geertem. As fy manche Billington onion the werloos en ig egge Olje na peber en benten, den leid de gischichten, gistjigen, en leid de gistjigen. Hugge a draagarm, bonnes fagen, risch vergene skriunen, honnig me boer de Count, rosh merau fissem na plannen jowelach egge. Wat a chulju rid we smunje der de gereilach, as jint de hodreilach as de girach. We jean de rauwe fosen, we jean de rauwe erlus on dag cumrail, odach we currit tru tagert, ons red je culinen of a fosen. Mort an Americani grey, grauw weg, jint mor giaull egge. As grauwe sledden kjartes lesh van a sergen egge in gulina, ach an Irish versoenach jane gereil egge. Honnig me a kunta as ren me kop jay. Jai kistjigen as died de oer gajen, as imid de we jintji son oren praweltach. A skriwen nis vai Gus Carter Patterson as a fragerdock, hoor me kop jane and nis jousen shaw. Now, whether or not this was in violation of Manx laws, Robertson says it was destructive of the prosperity of the people. Now, that would be through neglect of agriculture and other trades to concentrate on the running trade, with its attendant risks of getting caught, and, of course, breadwinners being imprisoned or even killed, shot and killed, as happened sometimes. And as mentioned, whether or not it was in violation of the laws of the island, it was, says Robertson, injurious to the interests of the neighbouring kingdoms. However, as it considerably increased his insular revenue, the Duke of Atholl possessed not the magnanimity to attempt its abolition. This fraudulent trade in 1726 had engaged the attention of the British legislature, and an act was then passed authorising the Earl of Derby, for a pecuniary compensation, to resign his royalties. Under the government of the Duke of Atholl, this clandestine commerce was prosecuted with such increasing avidity as to demand the immediate interposition of the superior power. The superior power meaning England, of course. Now, this is a song in Breton, da Bellech, meaning where to, whither. It's sung by Nolwenn Corbell and her band.
Oh, vonda Bellech, manol. Oh, te hot rakbe mein ol. Cassette, waarom tu penal? Hashet, gize barzer mil en dal. Oh, vonda beller manol. Oh, vonda hunit edakal. Sklape da flastre tureu.
Nolwen Corbel from Douarnenez in Brésisel asking, where to? Dabelech. Consequently, several proposals were made to James Murray, the second Duke of Atholl, for revesting the royalty of the isle in the crown of Britain, says Robertson. Well, the island had been a kingdom in its own right, came under the sway of Norway, then Scotland, and England fought to exert power over it, with the English throne becoming the dominant force. Robertson has described how English monarchs awarded the Kingship of Man to various people through the years. It was Henry IV who'd granted it to Sir John Stanley in 1405, supposedly for his help in attaining the throne. But the story is that the Stanleys held back until they could see who was winning and then galloped in on that side. In 1406 the grant had been extended to the Stanley heirs, and when the direct line ran out, it stepped sideways to the Murrays, the Dukes of Atholl. In wanting to take over the Murray's Lordship of Man, the now British Crown expressed prior seigneurship by calling it revestment. Siofol yw y ffys odach maensio Billington Cordaw, mas o hai mi shiscus a fyrt, as rem mi Lord Rishna Garden Cws, Rishna Myrn Custom, as Risha Weinsio Pyrda. Verridderach oxen olju de grei mach on entrelas quech a veda, ta chit hanna de ynu sus arn jay tradisjoen in a doil. A gedod pech erbij cortulju den chunten jou cramp, jai kistjigen as daid de oergajen. Eis lor mi rische weinscher station, as de kindjel hug ik head au lortris na Dania, a she udsen de jar au hoer na kistjigen. Van teli ook kjart mar van rola, as gerau weg elje ook de grei, ach, de rau na kistjigen, tro maglach as mugin, as skuche ad den ei over chirm van. Door ver jou nis, den ei drag oerwee, trein a rau dunje ser erbij, tjein lid de shuheen squire, de heilsige mag soort enjach de wies on ebenokkens, komme vlioch. Hug ver elias jack barrel elie, de rau a fes en e jenten ege trei shen, huish, as na rau ieren trei van onshaan jere shen, winige i de bollach. Thomas Collister and David Kilgallen with a track from their recent Popular Manx Tunes album. There we heard what they call HEDGES, we heard Girls from Balladul.
Manx Radio.
Stasiwn yn asiwn ta Radio Fanning ys si Claare na Gael visgol sgelia maach cartnish. Meron peen Robert Cutting Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Have I heard tell of old Bobby Bob?
Sgone ta fe morm grain, yes. Gau mi kereel, roos me deg me, de redden rei de breg as de koei, rish an oor shows on drachu. En jail lei as feed main fower. Van manche station gemai is de gordau skriwen, den chan chum reg egge, a manche station ons King's Cross. Maar so tre renk me savora. dat mi braiach je mechion rosh in the kistjichen. Ranesh nis corcair out chilirach, the Lord Rishnoas in cui, as honnig me de rauw telia cart red en chidhunta. Va cagliach en shaw na cairns je Gael aru pes erskin carginus, ach, va immed brouwer ve jintjou, as rish van mi eignet de chorish en airtis on zacht ex post facto. Va shen heimigus igmenach carte Patterson, bol henket machweel lesh en choortalid smoo. Rennad shirra dellal ons en lior leis en lior skriwenach, as chilirach hugged aim chelwen nigok ons King's Cross, son tullium in fishery. Now, various proposals were made by the British Crown to take back, as they said, to revest in the British Crown what had been granted by the English Crown, the regalities of the Lordship of Man, and these were to come back from James Murray, the 2nd Duke of Atholl. But, says Robertson, without seeming to reject these, James, by various procrastinations, politically evaded their acceptance. He died in 1764, and his nephew and successor was John. And Robertson includes a footnote here: by his descent he, John Murray, inherited the dukedom of Atholl, and by his marriage with the daughter of the late Duke he obtained the kingdom of Man. His eldest son, says Robertson, writing in 1794, now possesses the former honour, that's the earldom of the Duke of Atholl. The latter is for ever lost to that family. But anyway, here Robertson's jumping ahead of what he's about to tell us in the text. Being a weak prince, he says, James was partly intimidated and partly allured to resign, for £70,000, the kingdom of his ancestors. Now, according to Merv Davey, the Cadgwith anthem emerged from a sea song, Robber's Retreat, in the early 20th century and quickly became popular amongst the singers in Cornwall. Julian Holmes made a version of it in Cornish, and here it's sung by John Bolaitho.
Did the hevel God's bledren have then lawene? Rach rachna ladra dini mura blade. Hanio deria drain nanzo matif an bledgeno. Han lilli han briari han rosino wait. In the bed, in the bed, in the bed. Honey blue, those crazy sonnesar. Safnes haras for la bona purwet. Hanio deria drain nanzo, matif an bledgeno. Han lilli, han briari, han roseno wet. Din the vez, din the vez, din the vez. Bis in fall, bis in anilio, raktif ladron kreis. Din the vez, din the vez, din the vez.
John Bolaitho, and a Cornish language version of the Cadgwith anthem, which he sang there with an uncredited accompaniment. I'll have to see if I can trace who it was playing the accordion on that one. John Bolaitho, anyway, an ex-grand bard of the Cornish Gaereth. James Murray accepted £70,000 for the regalities of the island, and Robertson notes that an annuity of £2,000 was afterwards obtained for the lives of himself and his duchess. Well, not that the Murrays were satisfied with the £70,000, and in fact they became known as the Grasping Murrays. Well, back to Robertson's text. Accordingly, on the 7th of March 1765, the regal dignity of Mona was for ever lost in the superior effulgence of the British diadem. But, he says, though this change affected her ancient splendour and temporary interests, it soon increased and confirmed her happiness. And in a footnote he says that, since 1765, the population of the Isle of Man has considerably increased. It now amounts to 30,000 inhabitants. And then he gives us a little bit of the layout of the land. The island extends from north to south upwards of 30 miles, but rarely exceeds 12 miles in breadth. And, concludes Robertson, the island had this change in its status, so that now, he says, from the bounty of heaven and the establishment of the British government, the island enjoys a plenitude of blessings. So he's putting the British government in the same realm as heaven by the sounds of it. Now, from the bounty of heaven and the establishment of the British government, the island enjoys a plenitude of blessings. Sech oil vei, van a Danier en Immergard, furchten aber, as rennen oos as lau corad nol, as hug leis verjouwe bille Immerga, as ulien a peber en colchonel leis livrein a kistigen gus Carfax. On sio rish hŵr mi dar awe telia cordeel de girach. Vadenia cholocht Immerga, gamleisel, Vadenia choloch Immergach, ebel de chor gus gennig na fogd en script leis min foint na ghe. Wat sio, hŵr mi mach de leer, colchonel bunnes inrichen rish ach Jonach a chiartag, as rish a fes, mach a shen henk na avrian. Tre hug mi care, trud perta öger drai a riach, de gedden reirish, tre san mi emnach en ook van deisach sio, durt ver jene denia. Tan tai sio shenchen oor de vers gwei van mir you on, blimey. Ach rauw lauwer bij on, rish giet blain. Va John gechoose of all, de bechoer wij able de gadle gin gortig en de krauwened. As van bol genagger, de bechoer wij able, de horrel shaan Jerusalem on. Now, from the Connemara Gaeltach, these are siblings, Seamus and Cuiva Ilacherta, with the song Cashlon a Chlieva, Castle of the Mountains.
Count on Russian Brodinter, nach Kusiles, Sunderlandschaft, Tafas Gallery, Angelienne Sommerstück, Catherine Key Sports on Shabbos. Oh, Kasu had mission from Nunedane. Let's it's in the year, Sharon Shanachio. Corium on Labog is big in Romshin, Snirok of Mariste, the Martin. Ton Crotty, Relas on a whiting of Fleeing. Ton Boyd Huran Wheelon, a fatigue is show. Ton Trog of Field Farshing. Sorry, son, come take us something on the spine. Now it's all, slå det til i vejen om
And that's Seamus O'Flaherty and his sister Cuiva ne Laherty, and they're from the Gaeltach in Connemara, and they were singing about Cashlon a Chleva, the mountain castle. Ach a chan chabal, va shen sa chidin it an shen. Mish is ma chumreg, va shen smunyan nach jinnach e chitlin, cos na mag asji tavi de lure. Ma ye, ha jinnan's goil na slew na punt dach shalid, da hanach dan on shen, log tujum na Tujum na he. No drau mish er wees a tai, dod me de jaru krele. Ach, de berg vis egge, sen as de vis jinnach e liam shira conent, forden a smoo. Having thus deduced the succession of the House of Stanley to the government of Man, and given a sketch of their public transactions, so far as they're connected with my subject, I shall now conclude this review of the Manx history with a few general observations. And so we'll move on to that final chapter next time. And waiting in the wings is Chris Pearson to bring 2 hours of the best chill-out music for your Sunday evening between 7 and 9. And at 9, Judith Lay will be here to present Sundown. Well, I was watching an edition of a programme called Iaith, meaning language, on Channel Pedwarek recently, and it was about the linguistic heritage and experience of Lisa Jane, who was here for Nchruniac as the lead singer of the Welsh band Ninebach. And we closed this edition of Claare Gael with the sound of Ninebach as Lisa Jane leads them in a traditional Welsh song, Pa Bryd y Dau Eto, confusingly telling us that her name is Gwenno and asking when will Daor Glyn come again to see her. Ach, Siananish, and so until the next time, this is Robert Cutting Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Oh, Bobby Bob.
Wishing you a very good night. Eve, I'm a Chrieriu, as Orsel ye, as my Yiri and shared you will you.
dueno ta pryd dei eto os gwydroedd ei o'r glyn mae'n halon hanon disgwyl cael gweld dwy neb anwyd mae'n halon hanon disgwyl amdanat ei o'r glyn